right, hi fourth grade, how are you? I hope that you had a really great weekend, and I hope that it was a really good Easter, and I hope that you colored Easter eggs and hunted Easter eggs or stuffed plastic eggs and had lots of fun over the weekend. So that was always the fun part of Easter. All right, the book I'm going to read today is called Jangles, a Big Fish Story. And I thought this would be a really good book to read for this time of year because I know it's starting to get warm and people are going to be fishing. And if you've ever known anybody that was fishing, or maybe you went fishing and you came back, or they came back and said, I caught a really big fish, and somebody said, well, how big was it? And you said, it was this big. And everybody says, oh yeah, it wasn't that big, because that's impossible. That's what people used to say, that was a whopper of a tale, or that you told a whopper, which means there's some story, some truth to the story, but that you exaggerated a lot, and so that usually was called a whopper. So this kind of comes from the idea of that, because this book is about a really big fish. So we'll talk at the end about whether it was fiction or nonfiction, which you probably already have an idea of what it is right now. So all right, we're going to go ahead and get started. This is Jangles, a Big Fish Story by David Shannon. When the sun goes down and the weather's just right, Big Lake gets smooth as glass and a thin mist whispers across it. That's when you might catch a glimpse of Jangles. My father told me lots of stories, but my favorite was about a giant trout he saw when he was a kid. I still remember sitting with him in front of the big stone fireplace at the cabin. He pulled out a dirty green tackle box and shook it a couple of times so it rattled. And then he told me this story. When I was a kid, Jangles was the biggest fish anyone had ever seen or heard. That's right, you could hear Jangles. He'd broken so many fishing lines that his huge, crooked jaw was covered with shiny metal lures and rusty old fish hooks of all shapes and sizes. They clinked and clattered as he swam, and that's why he was called Jangles. Jangles was so big, he ate eagles from the trees that hung over the lake and full-grown beavers that strayed too far from home. But he didn't seem to care much for the taste of kids. In fact, people swear one time Jangles saved a baby who fell into the lake when his family's canoe tipped over. They say he took that baby up so gently that none of the hooks even stuck it, and he swam it to shore. Supposedly, he gave the baby's mama a dirty look as if to say, what are you doing bringing your precious little baby out here in a tippy old canoe? Everyone wanted to catch Jangles. They held big tournaments with lots of prize money, but no one could bring him in. He was too smart and too strong, and he lived too deep down in the middle of the lake. They tried all sorts of tricks, like using whole turkeys for bait. One fellow even tried dynamite. He threw big cans of tuna fish in the water and waited till he heard Jangles coming. Then he lit a stick of dynamite and tossed it in the lake. I don't know if it hit a rock or something, but that dynamite came flying back out of the water and into his boat and blew it to smithereens. Then he had to swim all the way back to his dock. He said Jangles came up and bumped him on his butt, but nobody believed him. One time when I was just about your age, I was fishing over where the creek comes into the lake, and my anchor came loose. I was concentrating so hard on catching a fish that I didn't notice I was drifting way out into the middle of the lake. There wasn't another soul out there, and it was getting dark. Just when I realized where I was, I felt a tug on my line. Not a really big tug, but something was on the other end. I started to reel it in. It was wiggling all right, but it didn't really feel like a fish. I finally got it in, and what do you know? I'd snagged an old fishing rod that somebody must have dropped out of a boat a long time ago. started to reel in that one too. I cranked and finally felt the end of it getting closer to the surface. Then I heard a sound that made my whole body feel all prickly. It was kind of soft at first. Tinkle, tangle, dingle. Then it started getting louder. Tingle, jingle, jangle. Now I used to daydream all the time about catching jangles, but right then I was scared to death. Just when I saw the lure on the end of the line, a gigantic shadow came out of the deep darkness and swallowed it up. My rod bent nearly in half. I was hanging onto it like it was my first dollar when Jangles suddenly swam under the boat and pulled me right over the side and into the cold black lake. Down we went like a crazy horse and buggy. Pretty soon I noticed I still could breathe and the water wasn't cold anymore. Finally, we came to a cave in the deepest part of the lake. It was decorated with parts of old boats and lots of rods and reels. "This is my home," said Jangles. "It's been a long time since I had a visitor." His voice was so low and soothing, it seemed perfectly natural that this fish was talking, so I wasn't afraid at all. Then Jangles told me stories. Amazing, wonderful stories about the beginning of the earth before there were people, and stories about wise old redwood trees and animals who were silly and the great fish that lived before him in Big Lake. It was like Jangles was my magic uncle. After a while, I started to get sleepy, and he said, "Time to go." He told me to hang on to the big fin on his back. I still had the old rod in my hand, and as we swam up and the water turned from black to purple, I slowly pulled out some line and made a bunch of long loops. When we reached the surface, Jangles swam alongside my boat. Quick as a minnow, I hopped off the fish's giant back and threw the coils of line around him. Then with a sharp yank, I spun him upside down. Now you might not know this, but when you turn a fish upside down, even a big old smart fish like Jangles, it gets confused and can't hardly move, like it's paralyzed. "Gotcha!" I shouted. Jangles just lay there, but he could still talk. "You tricked me," he cried. "I told you secrets from the beginning of time, and this is how you thank me?" "You are a fish," I said, "and I have caught you." "Set me free," Jangles urged. "I am more than a fish. I am a storyteller and a story." "A story no one will believe if I let you go," I replied. Then Jangles asked me, "Is that more important than doing what is right?" I thought of all the wondrous things I'd heard that day. Then I thought about people dragging whole turkeys around the lake. "You're right," I said. "I'm sorry. I will set you free, but what can I do to apologize?" "I swear," Jangles grinned at me with that big, crooked, jingly jaw of his. "There is one thing you can do to help me," he said, "and it would also prove you caught old Jangles." That's when my dad stopped telling his story and gave me his tackle box. It was full to the top with shiny metal lures and rusty old fish hooks of all shapes and sizes. He never told anyone about catching the giant fish. He kept it a secret until that night when he told me. And now, I'm telling you. All right, so obviously, what did Jangles ask his dad to do when he was a little boy? So he asked him to take the lures, all the fishing lures out of his mouth, didn't he? All right, so is this fiction or nonfiction? All right, so I know you said fiction. I know you did. Why is it fiction? Okay, for obvious reasons, lots of reasons. Fish can't talk. Fish can't ride babies around on their back. And fish don't tell stories. So many, many reasons that this isn't a true story. Remember, fiction stories are made up stories. This was a whopper of a tale. All right, so Jangles, let's go back to a couple of things I wanted to bring up. All right, so when his dad caught Jangles and he said, set me free, I am more than a fish, I'm a storyteller and a story. And the boy said, a story no one will believe if I let you go. All right, and then Jangles asked me, is that more important than doing what is right? All right, so in that moment, that boy had a decision to make. Doing the right thing or doing what would make him famous. Because remember, Jangles was a fish that everyone was trying to catch. So think about that for a minute. If that was you and you were in that position of whether you could catch this fish that no one had been able to catch and that everyone was trying to catch, and you could catch it and show everyone that you caught it, or doing the right thing. So that would be hard. So that's a decision. So he had a choice to make. And did he end up doing the right thing? Yes, because he let Mr. Jangles go. He felt bad and said told Mr. Jangles, yeah, you're right, and I'm sorry, and what can I do to apologize? And then Jangles made a compromise of where he could still be set free, but then help the boy prove that he caught Jangles after all, and that was asking him to remove the fish hooks out of his mouth. So that's where the big old tackle box full of fish hooks came in the end. It was all of the lures that he had taken out of his mouth. All right, so what do you think the right thing to do is? Now, if he'd caught Jangles and came back to shore and showed everybody what he had done, what would have eventually happened to Jangles? So he probably would have died. So that probably wouldn't have been the right thing to do. Now though, things are different because we have phones, and I mean, you can say, well, I could have taken a picture of it, and that's true also. But if we didn't have cell phones and we didn't have cameras and somebody caught Mr. Jangles, we would have to make a choice. What would the right thing to do be? Especially if he could talk and he was saying, please let me go. So you think about that. What would you do? All right, so you have a wonderful week this week, and I will see you next week for week 3 of library. Bye.